military has the duty of making difficult decisions without knowing the full picture. Somewhere relying on assumptions, somewhere on the flair. There is such a term, fog of war, which means a constant lack of information. Intelligence data very quickly become obsolete, and it is necessary to have a clear action plan and be ready to improvise in any situation. But every decision requires responsibility in situations of hostilities, namely responsibility for people's lives. And the higher the rank of a commander is, the more soldiers might be killed if a mistake is made in the decision-making process. Moreover, defeat is not always the result of wrong decisions. This is the 17th episode of the film about the ATO, the history of war. We are trying to understand the course of the anti-terrorist operation in the east of Ukraine. We study the course and results. What does Russia have to do with this? And how events in the east of Ukraine can have an impact on the life of Europe. On August 11th, the terrorist leader Alexander Zakharchenko announced an early counteroffensive of the so-called Donetsk militia. Without answering the question where did the people and equipment come from, he kept silent about the readiness of regular Russian troops to invade the territory of Ukraine. And only after 2 days, the units of the 18th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade of the Russian Army began the fight against Ukrainian troops. The situation has heated up. From August 13th to August 18th, in the fights with terrorists and Russian troops, 95 Ukrainian officers and soldiers were killed. Absolutely not thinking about the safety of civilians, the militants actively used rocket launcher systems, firing at villages and roads. In the Luhansk Oblast, the situation developed successfully. The units of the ATO forces even entered the city, having repulsed the militants in some districts, the southeastern part. A part of the terrorists threw down their weapons and left the city through the humanitarian corridor. On August 18th, the villages of Mala Ivanivka, Andrianopil, and Chernukine were liberated. There were fights for the towns of Nizhnya Krinka and Stanitsa Luhanska. At the same time, the situation in the Donetsk Oblast was much more dramatic. Mobile communications in those parts worked extremely unreliably. Soldiers who didn't understand what was going on around them were much less morally stable. At the same time, not all commanders used strict authority among people and weren't always able to motivate them. At the same time, the Russian Federation continued not only shelling but also applying information pressure. Practicing disinformation on the internet and the media, the Russian special services played on the emotions of the relatives of one soldier. And when the fighter called home, frightened relatives told him far from the best news. The tactics were standard. They have changed little since World War II. In order to stabilize the fighting spirit, a soldier should be convinced that his commanders left their positions. There would not be any reinforcements and resistance was useless. Thus, in the Stepanivka and Georgievka districts, part of the personnel of the 51st, 71st and 30th Brigades, succumbing to panic sentiments, retreated from their positions. This led to the fact that the 1st Battalion of the 30th Brigade, which operated successfully in the area of the city of Myusinsk, was isolated and left without supplies. And the Mount Sour Grave from the observation post turned into a forward position. And the distance to the nearest Ukrainian post was about 20 kilometers. The collapse of the defense, especially in the absence or lack of reserves, occurs on the basis of the domino effect principle. Even an advantageous position cannot hold on long without support and supplies. The enemy attacked the mound of Saur-Mogila, whose defense was led by Colonel of the General Staff Ihor Hordichuk. For several days, the military garrison of 10 people fended off the attacks. On August 18th, reinforcements managed to reach the mound, which allowed them to rotate the soldiers and take out the wounded. Noteworthy is the fact that, understanding the importance and danger of the task, only volunteers went to Saur-Mogila. Some of them were not even registered in the armed forces, since they had arrived in the ATO zone the day before, and there were simply no other reserves. Colonel Hordichuk, with the commander of a group of Crimean volunteers, Yuldashev, also remained at their positions. On the same day, near the village of Novokaterinivka, the Ukrainian military, for the first time, were fired at from the rocket fire system Urahan, with shells weighing 280 kilograms, each with a range of up to 35 kilometers. This weapon covers an area of 29 hectares. Unlike the BM-21 Hrad, which can be loaded by hand, the 9K-57 Urahan system, in view of the high mass of rockets, is equipped with a special transport charging machine. The reconnaissance of targets and the correction of artillery were carried out using military unmanned air vehicles Orlan-10. The Russian Federation thus supplied the militants with whole complexes of modern weapons. On the same day, August 18th, the terrorists fired upon a column of civilians living in Luhansk. Not paying attention to the white flags, the militants inflicted a crushing artillery blow on the machines. 17 civilians were killed and 6 people were hospitalized. In the Donetsk Oblast, the volunteer divisions of the Donbas and the Dnipro, in cooperation with the 51st Brigade and armored vehicles of the 17th Brigade, entered the western part of Ilovaisk and took positions there. A week before that, the 40th Battalion of the Territorial Defense occupied checkpoints on the outskirts of the city. On August 19th, the situation escalated. The terrorists no longer concealed the fact that they had used rocket launcher systems, having announced this in the mass media. At the same time, volunteer units of Azov, Donbas, and Dnipro 1 entered Ilovaisk, where street fighting started. The city itself, being a large transport hub, was divided into 2 parts by a railway station. In fact, it was already the 3rd attempt to assault the city. Despite the resistance of militants, the Ukrainian forces managed to occupy the western part of the city and held the railway depot. The reinforcements from Russia broke through to Luhansk. The Kremlin could not allow the separatists to surrender the regional administration and played openly. A column of Russian equipment with Russian servicemen appeared in the city. These actions allowed to strengthen the defense of militants and to change the balance of power in the region. In mid-August 2014, 2 neighboring villages, Georgievka and Lutuhino, were strategically important positions of the Ukrainian defense in Sector A. Almost all the artillery of the armed forces was concentrated in this area, which supported the actions of the army units to the full extent of the so-called LNR territory. About 4 o'clock in the morning, on August 20th, Russian artillery dealt a massive blow to the positions of the armed forces in Georgievka. The enemy used both barrel and rocket artillery. 2 squadrons of the 234th Paratrooper Regiment of the 76th Airborne Division from Pskov and a motor rifle vehicle of the troops of the Russian 15th Motorized Rifle Brigade were involved in the operation. As a result of the attack, 2 Ukrainian checkpoints were destroyed. One was the strategic height Sarmat, which was defended by Ukrainian fighters of the 24th Brigade, and the voluntary unit Storm was surrounded. However, on the advancing Russian troops, all available artillery opened fire. To support the troops, attack helicopters Mi-24P also arrived. As a result of the counterattack of the Ukrainian army, the Russians were defeated and retreated, having lost several units of equipment and more than 25 soldiers. As trophies, 2 combat vehicles with various secret documents on board were captured. According to intelligence, the loss of Russian paratroopers was even higher, as one of the troops completely lost combat capability and was withdrawn to Russia. Successful defense and a counter-attack from Herohivka were of great importance. Had the Russian army achieved its goals, a huge number of Ukrainian troops would have been surrounded. Fighting for independence, on August 20th, in the battle, 6 Ukrainian soldiers and 2 pilots were killed. The Russians shot down 1 helicopter from a portable anti-aircraft missile system. At the same time, fighting continued in the Donetsk Oblast in Ilovaisk. The militants received reinforcements. Moreover, Russian media reported about the Vostok and Oplot militia battalions in the city, but the captured militants were Russian paratroopers. At the same time, the situation in the area of Saur-Mogila was quite tense. After the soldiers of the 51st Brigade retreated from the neighboring village of Petrovsky, Hordichuk's troops remained. Ukrainian artillery was suppressed or retreated. Monitors fixed columns coming from the territory of Russia, directed artillery, but the effectiveness of the attacks was decreasing. On August 20th, Russian troops launched a routine storming of Saur-Mogila. The situation developed in such a way that the Russian artillery fired at the top of the mound, and on its slopes was the Ukrainian artillery. Despite the shelling on that day, the position was held. On August 21st, the region of the command post of Ukrainian troops of Sector D was hit by the Urahan system. The headquarters relocated to the Privolny district, and the control of the troops was given to the field command post. During the day, as a result of fighting and shelling, 17 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. In the Luhansk Oblast, there were defensive battles. In the area of Khrushchevati and Novosvitlovka, the armed forces liberated Stanitsa Luhanska. As a result of shelling, the forest caught on fire. The firemen had to work hard to localize the fire, working almost on the front line. This small city was under the control of the Ukrainian authorities. But when in 2017 there was a proposal for the deployment of troops in the area and the creation of the demilitarized zone, the citizens were against it. Not believing in the negotiability of Russian terrorists, they would gather rallies against the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army. They preferred to remain under the protection of the Ukrainian state. And the next day, the Ukrainian border was crossed by the so-called humanitarian convoy. 145 vehicles loaded with food, fuel and ammunition crossed the border at the Zvarna crossing point. The Security Service of Ukraine called this act a direct invasion of the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine. But it was a formal statement. Russian troops already operated in the area of Luhansk, Donetsk, Novoazovsk and Ilovaisk. Russian artillery fired at Ukrainian territory. 8 battalion tactical groups with heavy weapons were in full readiness on the border. The game of separatism and puppet republics failed. The population of Donbas did not support the pro-Russian militants. The Ukrainian leadership resisted accurately, as if stepping over the traps set by Putin. In the end, Russia didn't have a formal reason for the war. The Russian Federation attacked Ukraine treacherously, irrationally, and without declaration of war.